The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory, 1878, as Fiona Martin's trembling hands dropped the still smoking revolver. Blood seeped into the parched earth beneath the body of her husband, a man who, moments before, had been advancing on her with murder in his eyes and liquor on his breath. Her knuckles still throbbed from the last beating he'd given her, but tonight was different. Tonight, she had finally fought back. Fiona stared at her husband's motionless form, her mind racing like a spooked Mustang. James Martin had been a respected banker in the small town of Redemption Creek, but behind closed doors, he'd been a monster. Now he was dead, and while no one would mourn him, least of all Fiona, questions would be asked. Justice in the Wyoming Territory was swift and unforgiving, especially for a woman who killed her husband, no matter the reason. "I have to leave," she whispered to the empty house. "Now." With shaking hands, Fiona packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, and the meager savings she'd managed to hide from James over the years. After changing out of her blood-stained dress, she slipped out the back door into the night. The town was quiet as she made her way to the livery stable. Old Tom, the stable master, was fast asleep on his cot when she entered. Fiona hesitated, then left a gold coin beside him before leading her mare, Sadie, out into the night. It wasn't stealing if she paid, she reasoned, even if the owner wasn't awake to agree to the transaction. As the first hints of dawn broke across the eastern horizon, Fiona was miles from Redemption Creek, riding west toward the mountains. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to put as much distance as possible between herself and the life she was leaving behind. 3 days later, exhausted and low on supplies, Fiona spotted a small homestead nestled in a valley below. Smoke curled from the chimney and a few cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. Her stomach growled, reminding her that her last meal had been a stale biscuit nearly 24 hours ago. "What do you think, Sadie?" she asked her mare, patting the animal's neck. "Should we risk it?" The horse snorted in response, seemingly as tired and hungry as her rider. Fiona took a deep breath and guided Sadie down the slope toward the homestead. As they approached, a tall figure emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. Fiona tensed, her hand instinctively moving to the small pistol tucked in her saddlebag. "That's far enough," called a deep voice. "State your business." Fiona reined Sadie to a stop and raised her hands slightly. "I mean no harm. I'm just passing through and was hoping for some water and perhaps a bit of food. I can pay." The man lowered his rifle slightly but remained wary. As he stepped closer, Fiona could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair fell in waves beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "You're a long way from anywhere, madam," he said, his gaze taking in her dusty appearance and the dark circles under her eyes. "Where you headed?" "West," Fiona replied vaguely. "Just west." Something in his expression shifted, a flash of understanding that made Fiona wonder if her desperation was as visible as she feared. "Name's Lucas Wheeler," he said after a moment. "This is my ranch." "Fiona," she replied, deliberately omitting her surname. "Fiona Gray." If Lucas noticed her hesitation, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he nodded toward the house. "Well, Fiona Gray, there's fresh water in the well and I've got stew on the stove. Your horse looks like she could use some rest and grain too." Relief washed over Fiona. "Thank you, Mr. Wheeler." "I won't impose long, Lucas," he corrected. "Nobody calls me Mr. Wheeler except the banker when he's trying to foreclose on my land." A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth, and Fiona found herself returning it, the first genuine smile to cross her lips in longer than she could remember. Lucas led her to the house, a modest but well-built structure of timber and stone. Inside, it was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling, with simple furnishings and a few books stacked on a side table. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a chair at the wooden table. "I'll fetch you some water." Fiona sank gratefully into the chair, her legs trembling from exhaustion now that she'd stopped moving. She watched as Lucas moved about the kitchen, pouring water from a pitcher and ladling stew from a pot hanging over the fire. "Thank you," she said when he placed the food and drink before her. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," Lucas frowned. "That won't do. Eat up, there's plenty." The stew was hearty and flavorful, filled with chunks of venison and wild onions. Fiona tried to eat slowly, mindful of her manners, but hunger soon won out and she devoured the meal with embarrassing speed. "More?" Lucas asked when she'd scraped the bowl clean. Fiona shook her head, feeling her cheeks warm. "No, thank you. That was wonderful." Lucas settled into the chair across from her, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "So, Fiona Gray, who's heading west with no particular destination in mind. What are you running from?" Fiona stiffened. "I didn't say I was running." "You didn't have to." Lucas's expression remained neutral, not accusatory. "A woman alone, exhausted, riding hard without proper supplies. You're either running to something mighty important or away from something worse." For a moment, Fiona considered lying, but something in Lucas's steady gaze made her think he'd see right through any falsehood. "My husband," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I had to leave." Lucas nodded slowly. "Is he alive?" The direct question caught Fiona off guard. She looked down at her hands, noticing the fading bruises on her wrists where James had gripped her during their final confrontation. "No," she admitted, then raised her eyes to his, a challenge in her gaze. "He's not." Lucas held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good," he said simply, and rose to pour her more water. Fiona blinked in surprise. "Good, that's all you have to say." Lucas turned back to her, his expression serious. "I saw those marks on your wrists. I've seen that look in your eyes before in my mother's, before she finally found the courage to leave my father." He set the water down before her. "So yes, good. The world's better off without men who hurt women." Tears pricked at Fiona's eyes, but she blinked them away. "The law might not see it that way." "The law," Lucas scoffed. "Out here, justice and the law aren't always the same thing." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You planning to keep running?" "I don't know," Fiona admitted. "I hadn't thought beyond getting away." Lucas studied her for a moment. "My ranch hand quit last month. Headed to California with gold fever. I could use help around here, at least until you figure out your next move. Room and board plus wages." Fiona stared at him, searching for an ulterior motive. "You'd hire a woman, a stranger, someone who just admitted to killing her husband." A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "I need someone who can work hard and isn't afraid to do what needs doing. Seems to me you qualify." His expression turned serious again. "Besides, we all deserve a second chance, Fiona Gray." Something in the way he said it made Fiona wonder if Lucas Wheeler was seeking his own second chance on this remote ranch. She looked around the small but comfortable house, then out the window at the peaceful valley beyond. "I don't know the first thing about ranching," she admitted. Lucas shrugged. "You can learn. Question is, do you want to?" "Did she?" Fiona hadn't considered stopping her flight, hadn't dared hope for even a temporary sanctuary. But exhaustion weighed on her, and the thought of having a roof over her head and honest work to do was tempting. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I do, at least for a while. Then it's settled." Lucas pushed away from the counter. "There's a small cabin out back where my former hand stayed. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and dry. You can rest there today and we'll start fresh tomorrow." As Lucas showed her to the cabin, a simple one-room structure with a narrow bed, small table, and pot-bellied stove, Fiona felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. "Thank you," she said as Lucas prepared to leave her to rest. "Most men wouldn't be so kind to a stranger." Lucas paused in the doorway. "Most men haven't seen what cruelty does to good people," he said quietly. "Rest well, Fiona, you're safe here." As he walked away, Fiona wondered if that could possibly be true. Could she really be safe, even temporarily? And what would happen if someone came looking for James Martin's killer? The next morning, Fiona woke to the sound of roosters crowing and cattle lowing in the distance. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, panic seized her. Then the previous day's events came flooding back, and she remembered where she was. Lucas Wheeler's ranch, where she'd agreed to work in exchange for sanctuary. She rose and splashed water on her face from the basin, then changed into her cleanest set of clothes, a simple blouse and skirt that had seen better days. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand revealed a woman she barely recognized, thinner than she remembered, with shadows under her eyes and a wariness in her gaze that hadn't been there before she married James. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Breakfast in 10 minutes, Lucas called from outside. "Hope you like flapjacks." "I'll be right there," Fiona replied, quickly pinning her hair back and smoothing her skirt. When she emerged from the cabin, the morning sun was just cresting the eastern mountains, bathing the valley in golden light. The ranch looked even more picturesque in daylight, a modest but well-maintained operation with a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, and a few chickens scratching in the yard. Lucas stood by the main house, feeding scraps to a border collie that wagged its tail enthusiastically. He looked up as Fiona approached, and something in his expression made her self-conscious. "Good morning," she said, tugging at her sleeve. "Morning." Lucas nodded toward the house. "Coffee's hot and breakfast is almost ready." Inside, the table was set for two, and the aroma of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Lucas moved easily around the kitchen, flipping flapjacks with practiced skill. "I didn't know cowboys could cook," Fiona remarked, taking a seat. Lucas shot her an amused glance. "This cowboy can do a lot of things. Had to learn after my mother passed. It was either cook or starve." "Your father didn't," Fiona began, then stopped herself, remembering what Lucas had said about his father the day before. "No," Lucas confirmed, understanding her unfinished question. "After my mother left him, he drank himself to death within a year. I was 16. He slid a stack of flapjacks onto a plate and placed it before her. "Been on my own since then." "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. Lucas shrugged as he sat across from her with his own plate. "Don't be." "He wasn't much of a father even before the drinking took over, made me promise myself I'd never be like him." He poured syrup over his flapjacks. "What about you? Any family?" Fiona shook her head. "My parents died of fever when I was 18. James, my husband, was a family friend who offered to take care of me." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Some care that turned out to be." "How long were you married?" Lucas asked, his tone careful as if he wasn't sure she'd want to discuss it. 5 years, Fiona replied, staring into her coffee. "It wasn't bad at first, or maybe it was, and I just didn't recognize the signs." She looked up at Lucas. "He was respected in town, a banker, pillar of the community. No one would have believed me if I'd said anything." "I believe you," Lucas said simply. Those 3 words, spoken with such quiet conviction, nearly undid Fiona. She blinked rapidly, determined not to cry. "Thank you," she managed. "For everything." Lucas nodded, seemingly understanding her need to change the subject. "Finish up your breakfast. I'll show you around the place, and we can figure out where you'll be most helpful." The tour of the ranch revealed it to be larger than Fiona had initially thought. Besides the main house and her cabin, there was a substantial barn, a corral, a chicken coop, and a small blacksmith's forge. The cattle, about 30 head, grazed in pastures that extended into the foothills. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads," Lucas explained as they walked, "but it's mine, free and clear, built most of it myself over the last 10 years. "It's impressive," Fiona said sincerely. "You've done all this alone," had helped from time to time. "Hired hands mostly, though none stayed long. The isolation gets to some people." He glanced at her. "Fair warning, nearest town is Half Moon, about 15 miles south. I make a supply run once a month. The isolation doesn't bother you?" Fiona asked. Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I prefer the company of cattle and horses to most people. They're more honest." A slight smile softened his features. Besides, out here I can be myself, no one judging, no one expecting anything except what I choose to give. Fiona understood that sentiment all too well. Freedom, she murmured, exactly. Lucas looked at her with newfound appreciation. Now let's figure out what kind of work suits you best. Can you cook? Yes, though I'm no gourmet. Can you sew? Reasonably well. Garden, Fiona nodded. I kept a small vegetable patch behind my husband's house. Lucas seemed satisfied. Good. The chickens need tending, the garden could use a woman's touch, and I wouldn't mind having someone else cook from time to time. The mending's been piling up too. He gestured toward the house. You can handle those things to start, plus help with whatever else needs doing as you learn. It wasn't the life Fiona had ever imagined for herself, but as she looked around the peaceful valley, she felt something close to contentment for the first time in years. When do I start? She asked. Lucas's storm-gray eyes crinkled at the corners. No time like the present. The days fell into a rhythm that Fiona found both exhausting and exhilarating. She rose before dawn to collect eggs and help Lucas with the morning chores, then prepared breakfast. While Lucas worked with the cattle or tended to the endless tasks of maintaining the ranch, Fiona took charge of the garden, expanded it with seeds Lucas had been meaning to plant, and brought order to the somewhat chaotic storage shed. In the evenings, after a dinner they often prepared together, they would sit on the porch if the weather was fair, sometimes talking, sometimes enjoying the comfortable silence. Lucas taught her to play checkers, and Fiona discovered she had a natural talent for strategy that frequently left him shaking his head in mock dismay. "Where did you learn to be so devious?" he asked one evening after she captured 3 of his pieces in a single move. "Survival," she answered without thinking, then immediately regretted the honesty when she saw the shadow cross Lucas's face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to make light of." "No," Fiona interrupted. "Don't apologize. I don't want to be treated like I'm made of glass." She moved another piece on the board. "Besides, I'm enjoying beating you too much to be upset." The tension broken, Lucas laughed, a rich, warm sound that Fiona had been hearing more frequently as the weeks passed. "Is that so? Well, don't get too comfortable with winning. I'm just letting you get overconfident before I reveal my true skills." "Of course you are," Fiona teased, capturing his king. "That's why I just won." Again. As spring turned to summer, Fiona found herself looking forward to these evening conversations more than anything else. Lucas, initially reserved, gradually opened up about his life, his dreams for the ranch, stories of his childhood before his father's drinking worsened, his occasional loneliness in the years he'd spent building his home. In turn, Fiona shared pieces of herself, her love of books, memories of her parents, her talent for sketching that James had discouraged as a waste of time. She even showed Lucas a small drawing she'd done of his border collie, Ranger, sleeping by the fire. "This is remarkable," Lucas said, studying the sketch. "You have a real gift, Fiona." The genuine admiration in his voice warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. One sweltering July afternoon, as Fiona was hanging laundry to dry, she spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. Riders were approaching, at least 3, maybe more. Fear twisted in her gut as she dropped the wet shirt she'd been about to hang and ran to find Lucas. He was in the barn, repairing a harness when she burst in. "Riders coming," she gasped. "From the east." Lucas's expression darkened as he set aside his work and reached for the rifle he kept nearby. "Stay here," he instructed, striding toward the barn door. "Lucas," Fiona began, her heart pounding. He turned back, his face set in grim lines. "It's probably nothing. Travelers looking for water, maybe. But just in case, stay out of sight until I call for you." Fiona nodded, retreating into the shadows of the barn as Lucas walked out to meet the approaching riders. Through a gap in the wooden slats, she watched as 4 men on horseback approached the ranch house. They weren't dressed like lawmen, which offered a small measure of relief, but something about their demeanor, confident, almost arrogant, set her nerves on edge. Lucas stood his ground as the riders drew near, his rifle not quite pointed at them but ready to be raised at a moment's notice. The men reined in their horses a respectful distance away, and one a burly man with a shock of red hair dismounted. "Afternoon," the man called. "You Wheeler?" "I am," Lucas replied, his voice carrying clearly to where Fiona hid. "What can I do for you gentlemen?" "Name's Burke. Jed Burke." "These are my brothers." The red-haired man gestured to his companions. "We're looking for a woman. Dark hair, pretty, traveling alone, might have come through here a couple months back." Fiona's blood turned to ice. How had they found her? Had someone from Redemption Creek recognized her along the way? "What's your business with this woman?" Lucas asked, his tone neutral. Burke spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Family business. Her husband was our cousin, got himself killed, and she disappeared the same night." "Mighty suspicious if you ask me." "Sounds like a matter for the law," Lucas observed. "Law's too slow," one of the brothers called from horseback. "Family takes care of its own." "So you're not lawmen then," Lucas stated, shifting his weight slightly. "We're concerned relatives," Burke replied, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. "So, have you seen her?" Lucas was silent for a moment, and Fiona held her breath. "Can't say that I have," he finally answered. "Don't get many travelers through here, and certainly no lone women." "Sorry I can't help you." Burke studied Lucas, suspicion evident in his stance. "Mind if we look around? She might have passed through without you knowing." "Actually, I do mind," Lucas said firmly. "This is private property." The tension between the men was palpable, even from Fiona's hiding place. Burke's brothers shifted restlessly on their horses. "Seems mighty unfriendly," Burke observed. "Almost like you might be hiding something or someone." Lucas raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it directly at the men but making its presence clear. "I've answered your question, and now I'll thank you to move on. There's a town called Half Moon about 15 miles south if you need supplies." For a long, tense moment, Fiona feared the confrontation would erupt into violence. Then Burke shrugged and remounted his horse. "We'll be moving on then," he said, though his tone suggested this wasn't the end of the matter. "But we'll be around these parts for a while. If you happen to remember seeing Fiona Martin, you let us know." Fiona flinched at hearing her real name spoken aloud, so they knew exactly who they were looking for. "Safe travels," Lucas replied, not lowering his rifle until the riders had turned and begun to ride away. He remained standing there, watching until the dust cloud faded in the distance, then turned and strode quickly to the barn. "Fiona," he called softly. She emerged from the shadows, trembling. "They know my name," she whispered. "How did they find me?" Lucas's face was grim. "I don't know, but I don't trust them. Those aren't men looking for justice, they're looking for revenge." He ran a hand through his hair. "We need to get you somewhere safe." "Where?" Fiona asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "If they found me here, they could find me anywhere." Lucas took her gently by the shoulders, his touch steadying her. "We'll figure it out, but first, tell me everything. Who exactly was your husband, and why would these men track you for hundreds of miles?" Fiona took a deep breath, realizing it was time for complete honesty. "James Martin wasn't just a banker. He was involved in something illegal. I never knew exactly what, but there was money, lots of it, that didn't come from the bank. He had family connections I didn't understand." She looked up at Lucas. "The night he died, he was drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He said something about a deal gone wrong, about family expecting him to fix it. When I tried to leave the room, She swallowed hard. "He said he'd kill me before he'd let me leave him." "And you believed him?" Lucas said softly. Fiona nodded. "It wasn't the first time he'd hurt me, but it was the first time I truly believed he might kill me. When he came at me, I grabbed his revolver from the drawer. I didn't mean to shoot, not really. I just wanted him to stop." Tears welled in her eyes. "But the gun went off and he fell, and there was so much blood." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her as she trembled with the force of memories she'd been trying to suppress. "You did what you had to do," he murmured against her hair. "No one can blame you for that." "His family can," Fiona replied, her voice muffled against his chest, "and they are." Lucas held her for a moment longer, then gently set her back, his hands still on her shoulders as he looked into her eyes. "Did you take anything when you left?" "Something they might be looking for," Fiona frowned, thinking. "Just my clothes, some personal items, and what little money I had saved. I didn't touch James's things except—" Her eyes widened. "His journal. I took his journal." "Journal," Lucas repeated. "What kind of journal?" "He kept records of his dealings, names, amounts, dates. I grabbed it thinking it might explain things, might give me some leverage if I needed it, but I never looked at it." Fiona shook her head in disbelief. "It's in my bag in the cabin. I'd almost forgotten about it." "That could be what they're after," Lucas said, his expression turning thoughtful. "If your husband was involved in something illegal, that journal could implicate others, including his cousins." Fiona felt a chill run through her. "What do we do?" Lucas's jaw set in a determined line. "First, we get that journal. Then we decide our next move." The journal, when Fiona retrieved it from her belongings, was a leather-bound ledger filled with James's precise handwriting. Dates, names, and amounts were meticulously recorded, along with cryptic notations that made little sense to either of them at first glance. "This looks like more than just banking," Lucas observed as they pored over the pages at his kitchen table. "These amounts are too large, and some of these names," he pointed to a recurring entry. "Blake Sullivan. Isn't he the territorial marshal?" Fiona nodded slowly. "James entertained him at our home several times. They always spoke privately in his study." Lucas whistled low. "If a territorial marshal is involved, this goes deeper than I thought." He flipped through more pages. "Cattle rustling, land fraud, possibly worse. Your husband was keeping records of bribes, payoffs, and shipments." He looked up at Fiona, his expression grave. "This is enough to send several men to prison for a very long time, including, it seems, those Burke brothers." Fiona closed the journal, her hands shaking slightly. "They'll come back," she said, not a question but a certainty. "Yes," Lucas agreed, "and next time they won't leave so peacefully." He rose from the table, pacing the small kitchen. "We have options. We could take this to the federal authorities, but if the territorial marshal is corrupt, who knows how far this reaches. We could destroy it, but that might not convince them you don't have other evidence. Or. Fiona prompted when he trailed off. Lucas turned to face her, his expression resolute. "Or we use it as leverage. Make it clear that if anything happens to you, copies of this information will find their way to every newspaper and federal office in the territory." "Would that work?" Fiona asked, hope and doubt warring in her voice. "It might," Lucas admitted. "Men like that value self-preservation above all else, but it's risky." Fiona stood, squaring her shoulders. "I'm tired of running, Lucas. I'm tired of being afraid." Something shifted in Lucas's gaze, pride, perhaps, or admiration. "Then we stand our ground," he said, "but we'll need to prepare. They'll be back, and soon." They spent the rest of the day making preparations. Lucas cleaned and loaded every firearm on the property, showing Fiona how to use each one. They moved essential supplies to the root cellar, which could serve as a shelter if needed, and Lucas rode the perimeter of his property, setting up warning signals that would alert them to approaching riders. By nightfall, they were as ready as they could be, but the tension of waiting had left them both exhausted. They sat at the kitchen table, picking at the stew Fiona had prepared more out of habit than hunger. "You should try to get some sleep," Lucas suggested, noticing the dark circles forming under Fiona's eyes. "I'll keep watch." Fiona shook her head. "I couldn't sleep now if I tried." She looked up from her barely touched food. "Lucas, I'm sorry I brought this trouble to your door. You've been nothing but kind to me, and now I've put your life at risk." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "You have nothing to apologize for. Those men, they're the ones in the wrong, not you." "Still," Fiona insisted, "you could have turned me away. You could have handed me over to them today." "Why didn't you?" Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "When you first rode up to my ranch," he finally said, Exhausted and afraid but still holding your head high, I saw something in you that reminded me of my mother. She had that same strength even when life tried to break her." His eyes met Fiona's, intense and honest, "But it's more than that now. These past months, watching you heal, seeing you laugh again." Fiona, a sharp bark from Ranger interrupted whatever Lucas had been about to say. The border collie was at the door, hackles raised, growling low in his throat. Lucas was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. "Stay back from the windows." Fiona's heart hammered in her chest as she moved to retrieve the pistol Lucas had given her earlier. Through the window, she could see moonlight glinting off something metal in the distance, rifle barrels, perhaps, or the trim on a saddle. "How many?" she whispered. Lucas peered carefully through a gap in the curtains. "Can't tell yet. At least 2, moving slow. They're trying to be stealthy." He turned to Fiona, his expression grim but determined. "Get to the root cellar. Take the journal and stay there until I come for you." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Fiona protested. "Fiona," Lucas began, but she cut him off. "No, this is my fight too, more mine than yours, in fact." She checked that her pistol was loaded. "I'm staying." Their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills until finally Lucas nodded. "Stay behind me then, and if I tell you to run, you run. No arguments." Outside, the sounds of approaching horses grew clearer. Ranger continued to growl, ears flattened against his head. "Positions," Lucas murmured, moving to the side of the window where he could see out while remaining hidden from view. Fiona took up a similar position at the other window, her hands steady now, fear giving way to determination. She would not be a victim again, not tonight, not ever. The riders, 4 of them, the Burke brothers, returned as promised, stopped about 50 yards from the house. For a moment, they sat motionless on their horses, as if deciding their approach. Then, with a signal from the leader, they split up, 2 heading toward the barn while the other 2 approached the house directly. "They're trying to flank us," Lucas observed. "Smart, but predictable." As the riders drew nearer, Lucas moved to the door, cracking it open just enough to call out, "That's far enough, Burke. I told you earlier you're not welcome here." The riders halted, and Jed Burke's voice carried through the night air. "We know she's there, Wheeler, Fiona Martin. Hand her over and we'll leave peacefully." "There's no one here by that name," Lucas replied evenly. "Turn around and ride out or things will get unpleasant." A harsh laugh answered him. "Unpleasant? 4 against 1 seems mighty unpleasant for you already, Wheeler. Who said I was alone?" Lucas countered. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a rifle being cocked. "Last chance," Burke called. "Send her out or we're coming in, and we won't be gentle." Lucas glanced at Fiona, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, moving to stand beside him. "I want to talk to them," she said quietly. "Show them the journal, make them understand what will happen if they don't leave us alone." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but instead stepped aside, allowing her access to the door while remaining protectively close. Fiona took a deep breath and called out, "I have what you're looking for, Mr. Burke. James's journal. Every transaction, every bribe, every name including yours and your brother's." There was a tense silence, then Burke's voice, harder now. "All the more reason to ensure you don't leave here alive, Mrs. Martin. Copies have been made," Fiona lied smoothly. "If anything happens to me or Mr. Wheeler, they'll be delivered to federal authorities and newspapers across the territory. Your only option is to leave us alone permanently." Another silence, longer this time, followed by muttered conversation too low to make out. "Prove you have it," Burke finally called. Fiona hesitated, then replied, "April 18th, 1877. $5,000 to Blake Sullivan for intervention in the Rawlins matter, June 3rd, 1877. $8,000 to Jedediah Burke for livestock acquisition and transport. Shall I continue?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the sound of horses shifting restlessly. "What do you want?" Burke asked, his voice tighter now. "I want to be left alone," Fiona answered. "I want to disappear from your life as completely as James has. In return, those records stay buried." How do we know you won't change your mind later? Send those copies anyway. You don't, Fiona admitted. But I have no desire to see justice for James. I just want to live in peace. The muttered conversation resumed, more heated this time. Finally, Burke spoke again. We need to discuss this, among ourselves. Take all the time you need, Lucas called, but stay where you are. Any closer, and our agreement is void. The riders retreated a short distance, still visible in the moonlight but far enough away that their conversation couldn't be overheard. Do you think they'll agree? Fiona whispered to Lucas. He shook his head slightly. Men like that don't give up easily. They're weighing their options, but I wouldn't trust any agreement they make. What then? We can't hold them off indefinitely. Lucas's expression was grim. No, but we can make standing their ground as costly for them as possible. He gestured toward the kitchen. I have an idea. While the Burke brothers deliberated, Lucas quickly outlined his plan. It was risky, but if it worked, they might be able to end this standoff without bloodshed. After what seemed like an eternity, the riders approached again, stopping at the same distance as before. We've decided to accept your terms, Burke called, though his tone suggested the decision hadn't been an easy one. You keep quiet about what's in that journal and we'll leave you be. I want to hear you say it plainly, Fiona responded. You'll leave this place tonight and never return. You'll make no further attempts to find me or harm either of us. You have my word, Burke replied, the insincerity evident even at a distance. Lucas snorted softly. The word of a rustler and a murderer, not worth much. I agree, Fiona murmured. They're lying. Then we proceed with the plan, Lucas said, his voice low. Ready? Fiona nodded, her grip tightening on her pistol. Ready. Lucas raised his voice to call back to Burke. We accept your surrender. Throw down your weapons as a show of good faith, and we can all part ways peacefully. An angry curse was the only reply, followed by the unmistakable sound of a rifle being fired. The bullet splintered the wood beside the door, sending fragments flying. Get down, Lucas shouted, pulling Fiona away from the door as more shots followed, peppering the front of the house. They crawled to the kitchen, staying low as bullets continued to strike the building. They're providing covering fire for the others to approach from the sides, Lucas explained, peering carefully around the corner. We need to move quickly. Outside, the gunfire paused momentarily, likely as the attackers reloaded or repositioned. Lucas seized the opportunity, moving swiftly to the back door with Fiona close behind. Remember, he said as he eased the door open, stay low, move fast, and head straight for the barn. I'll be right behind you. Fiona's heart pounded as she slipped out into the night, keeping to the shadows as Lucas had instructed. The barn loomed ahead, dark and seemingly distant, though it was only about 40 yards away. Behind her, she could hear Lucas moving quietly, providing cover. They were halfway to the barn when a shout went up from the direction of the house. They'd been spotted. Run, Lucas urged, and Fiona abandoned stealth for speed, sprinting toward the barn as gunfire erupted behind them. She reached the barn door, yanking it open and diving inside, Lucas just steps behind her. He slammed the door shut and dropped the heavy wooden bar into place, securing it against immediate entry. Are you hit? He demanded, quickly checking her for injuries in the dim light filtering through the barn's windows. No, I'm fine, Fiona assured him, though her breath came in ragged gasps. You grazed my arm, but it's nothing, Lucas replied, though Fiona could see a dark stain spreading on his shirt sleeve. Help me with this. Together, they pushed a heavy wagon against the door for additional protection, then took positions at opposite sides of the barn, each with a clear view of the yard through gaps in the wooden walls. Outside, the Burke brothers had realized their quarry had escaped the house and were regrouping, two of them advancing cautiously toward the barn while the others maintained positions covering the exits. Smart of them to split up, Lucas murmured, but it works in our favor too. Ready for the next step, Fiona nodded, moving to where they had prepared their surprise earlier that day, a stack of oil-soaked rags attached to arrows with a lantern nearby. Wait for my signal, Lucas instructed, taking careful aim through a window with his rifle. The brothers approaching the barn were close now, moving from cover to cover but steadily advancing. Lucas squeezed the trigger. His shot struck the ground directly in front of the nearest attacker, sending the man diving for cover and momentarily disrupting their approach. Now. Lucas called, and Fiona lit the first rag-wrapped arrow from the lantern. Lucas took it from her and, using a bow they had positioned earlier, sent the flaming projectile arcing through the night to land on the roof of his own house specifically, on the oil-soaked section they had prepared. Flames erupted instantly, bright and hot, illuminating the yard and creating a massive distraction. The Burke brothers turned toward the sudden fire, momentarily confused by this unexpected development. Fiona lit the second arrow, which Lucas sent flying toward the water trough near where the other two brothers were positioned. This one contained not just oil-soaked rags, but a small packet of blasting powder Lucas kept for removing stumps. The resulting explosion wasn't large, but in the quiet night, it sounded thunderous, sending water and wooden fragments in all directions. Chaos ensued as the Burke brothers, caught between the blazing house and the explosion, began shouting to each other in confusion. "The horses," Lucas directed, leading Fiona to where he had hidden their mounts at the back of the barn. "We ride now while they're disoriented." "But your home," Fiona protested, looking at the flames now consuming the roof of the house. "Just the roof," Lucas assured her. "I built it to burn slowly if needed. It's a distraction, nothing more." He helped her mount, then swung onto his own horse. "The important thing is getting you to safety." With the bar removed from the rear barn door, they led their horses out into the night, keeping the barn between themselves and the confused attackers. The flames from the house cast enough light to see by, but also created deep shadows that helped conceal their movement as they made their way toward the tree line. "Where are we going?" Fiona asked as they urged their horses into a canter once they reached the cover of the trees. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles west in the foothills," Lucas replied. "We can shelter there until morning, then decide our next move." As they rode away from the ranch, Fiona looked back one last time at the place that had briefly become her home. Flames illuminated the scene, the house with its burning roof, the barn standing dark and solid beside it, and 4 men scrambling to regain control of the situation. She felt a pang of regret for what Lucas was sacrificing for her safety. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Your home can be rebuilt," Lucas finished firmly. "You can't. I made my choice, Fiona, and I don't regret it." The line shack was little more than a one-room shelter used by cowhands during roundup, but it was solid and well hidden in a stand of pine trees. Lucas had stocked it with basic supplies, food, water, blankets, and ammunition as part of his preparation for just such an emergency. "It's not much," he said as they settled in after tending to the horses, "but it'll keep us dry and warm for the night." Fiona sat on a rough wooden bench, watching as Lucas built a small fire in the stone fireplace. The adrenaline of their escape was wearing off, leaving her exhausted but still too tense to consider sleep. "What happens now?" she asked as Lucas joined her, wincing slightly as he sat. The graze on his arm had stopped bleeding but clearly still pained him. "Let me see that," Fiona said, gesturing to his injury. Lucas hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve to reveal a furrow across his upper arm where a bullet had carved a path through flesh but, thankfully, not struck bone. Fiona cleaned the wound with water from their supplies and bandaged it with strips torn from a clean shirt. Her fingers lingered on his arm, tracing the lean muscle beneath sun-bronzed skin. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "I don't know many men who would risk their lives for a woman they barely know." Lucas covered her hand with his. "I know you, Fiona. These past months I've come to know you better than I've known anyone in a long time." Their eyes met in the flickering firelight, and Fiona felt something shift between them, a tension that had been building since the day she arrived at his ranch, now heightened by the danger they'd faced together. "What happens now?" she asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "That depends on what you want, Fiona. The Burke brothers will assume we've fled the territory. We could use that, head north to Montana or west to California, start fresh where no one knows us." "Us," Fiona repeated, her heart quickening. "If that's what you want," Lucas said carefully, uncertainty flickering across his features. "I wouldn't presume." Fiona silenced him by pressing her fingers gently against his lips. "What if he comes looking?" she asked, voicing the fear that still lingered despite everything. "What if Burke finds us again?" Lucas took her hand, kissing her fingertips before answering with quiet determination. "Then he'll find me standing between you and him. Always." The simple promise, spoken with such conviction, broke something loose inside Fiona, a wall she'd built around her heart since the night she'd fled her husband's house. "Lucas," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of protection, passion, and possibility. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you rode onto my ranch," he confessed. "But I didn't want to pressure you, didn't know if you could ever feel the same after what you'd been through." Fiona cupped his face in her hands, feeling the stubble rough against her palms. "I was broken when I found you," she said softly. "But you never treated me like a victim or a burden. You gave me space to heal, to remember who I was before James. And somewhere along the way, I started to hope again, to feel again." She kissed him gently. "I love you, Lucas Wheeler. And I'm not afraid anymore." They spent the night in the lined shack, planning their future while wrapped in each other's arms. By morning, they had decided. They would head west to California, where Lucas had a distant cousin who owned land in the Sacramento Valley. They would use what money they had to start a new ranch, a new life together. But first, they needed to ensure the Burke brothers wouldn't follow. The journal remained their best leverage, and they agreed to make true what had been a bluff. They would mail copies of the most incriminating pages to a federal marshal Lucas trusted in Cheyenne, with instructions to open them only if they didn't receive word of their safe arrival in California within 3 months. As dawn broke over the mountains, they packed their few supplies and prepared to ride. Lucas paused at the door of the lined shack, looking at Fiona with a mixture of determination and hope. "Ready for a new beginning?" he asked, extending his hand to her. Fiona placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and gentleness in his grip. "More than ready," she replied, and together they stepped out into the golden light of a new day. Their journey west was long and not without challenges. They traveled mostly by night at first, keeping to less traveled routes and avoiding towns where word of a woman matching Fiona's description might have spread. They sold Lucas's cattle to a neighboring rancher for less than they were worth, but enough to fund their journey and provide a stake for their new start. As they put more distance between themselves and Wyoming Territory, they gradually relaxed their vigilance. By the time they reached Nevada, they were traveling openly as husband and wife, a status they made official in a small church in Virginia City, with only the preacher and his wife as witnesses. "Mrs. Fiona Wheeler," Lucas murmured as they left the church, his arm around her waist. "How does it sound?" "Like freedom," Fiona replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. "Like home." California welcomed them with abundant sunshine and fertile land. Lucas's cousin, Henry Wheeler, proved genuinely pleased to help them establish themselves, selling them a portion of his own ranch at a fair price and introducing them to neighbors who quickly accepted the young couple into their community. The land they purchased was smaller than Lucas's Wyoming ranch but rich with possibility, rolling hills dotted with oak trees, a creek running clear and cool along the eastern boundary, and soil that promised bountiful harvests. They built their house together, a sturdy structure with large windows that filled the rooms with light, a deliberate contrast to the darkness Fiona had left behind. As months passed without any sign of pursuit, they began to truly believe they had escaped their past. The journal pages they had sent to the marshal in Cheyenne had apparently served their purpose. Perhaps the Burke brothers had decided that revenge wasn't worth the risk of exposure. One evening, a year after their arrival in California, Lucas found Fiona sitting on their porch, sketching the sunset that painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Her talent had flourished in their new home, her drawings becoming sought after by neighbors who commissioned portraits of their children or landscapes of their properties. "Beautiful," Lucas said, sitting beside her and admiring the sketch. "It's not finished yet," Fiona replied, smiling as she added details to the oak tree in the foreground. "I wasn't talking about the drawing," Lucas murmured, kissing her temple. Fiona set aside her sketch pad, turning to face him. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Lucas's expression transformed from surprise to joy in an instant. "A baby, you're certain?" Fiona nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. Come spring, there will be 3 wheelers on this ranch." Lucas gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed against her hair. "Never thought I deserved it." "We both deserve it," Fiona assured him, drawing back to look into his eyes. "After everything, we've earned this happiness, Lucas." As if to punctuate her words, a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, a good omen, Fiona decided, for their growing family. Their daughter, Laura, was born on a bright April morning in 1880, with Lucas pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door until the midwife finally invited him in to meet his child. Fiona would never forget the look on his face when he first held their daughter, a mixture of awe, terror, and boundless love that brought tears to her eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling the tiny bundle against his chest with hands that could break a wild horse, but touched his daughter with infinite gentleness. Just like her mother. Life settled into a rhythm defined by the seasons of the ranch and the milestones of their growing child. Laura took her first steps in the garden Fiona had planted, spoke her first words "papa" and "horse," much to Lucas's delight while sitting on his lap during evening story time, and developed her mother's artistic eye and her father's love of the land. By the time Laura was 5, the Wheeler Ranch had prospered beyond their initial hopes. They had expanded their holdings, built a larger barn, and established a reputation for quality horses that brought buyers from as far away as San Francisco. Fiona's artwork hung in homes throughout the county and even in a gallery in Sacramento, while Lucas had become a respected member of the local Ranchers Association. Their past remained just that past. Occasionally, Fiona would wake from a nightmare, heart racing with the memory of James's rage or the Burke brothers' pursuit. But Lucas was always there, his arms a sanctuary, his voice a reassurance that she was safe, loved, protected. On a warm summer evening in 1885, as they watched 7-year-old Laura chasing fireflies in the twilight, Fiona rested her head on Lucas's shoulder and reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving your ranch in Wyoming? Taking such a risk for a woman you barely knew?" Lucas turned to face her, his gray eyes as intense as they had been the day he'd promised to stand between her and danger. "Not for a single moment," he said, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Everything I truly needed I brought with me." Fiona smiled, leaning in to kiss him. "Even after all this time, you still say the sweetest things, Cowboy." Lucas grinned, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way that still made Fiona's heart skip. "Only the truth, Mrs. Wheeler. Only ever the truth." As darkness fell and Laura tired of her game, they called her in for bedtime. Together, they tucked their daughter into bed, listened to her prayers, and promised as they did every night that they would be there when she woke in the morning. Later, lying in their own bed with moonlight spilling through the window, Fiona traced the scar on Lucas's arm, the reminder of the night they had fled together, choosing love over fear. "We made it," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. Despite everything, we made it. Lucas pulled her closer, his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek. We did, he agreed, and we always will. Outside their window, the California night was peaceful, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. Within the walls of the home they had built together, Fiona Wheeler, once a frightened woman fleeing for her life, slept soundly in the arms of the man who had promised to stand between her and harm. He had kept that promise, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift of all: a life filled with love, purpose, and the quiet certainty that she would never have to face her fears alone again. As the years passed, the Wheeler family continued to flourish. Laura grew into a confident young woman with her mother's artistic talent and her father's steadfast nature. By the time she was 18, she had become an accomplished horsewoman and a gifted painter whose work was beginning to attract attention beyond their local community. The ranch expanded further, becoming one of the most prosperous in the region. Lucas and Fiona, partners in every sense, worked side by side to build something that would endure beyond their lifetimes, a legacy for Laura, and for the son who had joined their family when Laura was 10. Michael, named for Fiona's father, a spirited boy with Lucas's gray eyes and boundless energy. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1898, as Fiona sat on the porch watching Lucas and 15-year-old Michael mend a fence in the distance, Laura joined her, fresh from a ride on her favorite mare. "You're smiling that smile again, Mother," Laura observed, settling into the chair beside Fiona. "What smile is that?" Fiona asked, though she knew exactly what her daughter meant. "The one where you look at Father like he hung the moon just for you," Laura replied with a teasing grin so like Lucas's that it made Fiona's heart swell. "Even after all these years?" Fiona laughed softly. "Especially after all these years." Laura's expression turned thoughtful. "Will you ever tell us the full story about how you and Father met? I know there's more to it than the simplified version you've shared." Fiona considered the question. Over the years, they had told their children a carefully edited version of their history: that Fiona had been widowed, had met Lucas while traveling west, and had fallen in love along the journey. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. "Perhaps someday," Fiona said finally. "When you're older." Laura rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Mother, I'm 21. I'm courting the doctor's son. How much older must I be?" Fiona reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Old enough to understand that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings can arise from the darkest moments. And that the measure of a person isn't in their mistakes or their suffering, but in how they rise above them." Laura studied her mother's face, seeming to sense the weight behind her words. "I think I understand that already," she said softly. "It's what you and Father have shown us our entire lives." As the sun began to set, Lucas and Michael made their way back to the house, dusty and tired but satisfied with their day's work. The family gathered for dinner in the spacious dining room that had replaced their original small kitchen as the ranch prospered. These moments, the four of them together, sharing stories of their day, laughing over Michael's latest misadventure with a stubborn calf, discussing Laura's upcoming exhibition in San Francisco, were what Fiona treasured most. The family she and Lucas had created was their greatest achievement, built on a foundation of love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. Later that evening, after the children had retired to their rooms, Fiona found Lucas in his study, reviewing the ranch's accounts. She slipped behind his chair, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and pressing a kiss to the top of his head, now sprinkled with silver among the dark strands. 20 years, she murmured, resting her cheek against his. "Can you believe it's been 20 years since we came to California?" Lucas set down his pencil and turned to pull her onto his lap, a gesture that still made Fiona's heart race despite the decades they'd spent together. "Best decision I ever made," he said, his voice deep with emotion. "Riding west with you." Fiona traced the lines at the corners of his eyes, lines earned from years of squinting into the sun, from laughter, from a life lived fully and without regret. Laura asked about our past today, she told him. The real story. Lucas's expression grew serious. What did you tell her? That someday when she's older we might share it, Fiona sighed. But I've been thinking, Lucas, perhaps it's time they knew they're not children anymore and the danger. Surely it's long past now. Lucas was quiet for a moment, considering. You might be right, he finally said. The Burke brothers, if they're even still alive, would have no reason to pursue us after all this time. And our children deserve to know where they came from, the whole truth of how their parents found each other. Fiona leaned her forehead against his. You don't think they'll think less of me? For what I did? Never, Lucas said firmly. They'll understand, as I did, that you did what was necessary to survive, and they'll be proud, as I am, of the strength it took for you to rebuild your life from ashes. He kissed her gently. Besides, our story may have begun in darkness, but look at the light we've created since then. Fiona smiled, feeling the truth of his words in the solid warmth of his embrace, in the home they'd built together, in the family they'd raised with love and honesty. Tomorrow, then, she decided. We'll tell them tomorrow. The next evening, after dinner, Lucas and Fiona gathered their children in the parlor. As the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room filled with mementos of their life together, they shared the full story of their beginning, James's cruelty, Fiona's desperate flight, their meeting at Lucas's Wyoming ranch, and the danger they had faced together before escaping west to start anew. Laura and Michael listened in rapt silence, their expressions shifting from shock to concern to admiration as the tale unfolded. You stood against 4 armed men to protect Mother? Michael asked, awe in his voice as he looked at his father with newfound appreciation. Lucas nodded. I told her then what I've lived by every day since, that if trouble ever came looking for her again, it would find me standing between them. And you, Mother, Laura said, her eyes shining with tears and pride. You were so brave. Fiona shook her head slightly. I was terrified, darling. But sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about facing your fears, because something more important is at stake. When the story was complete, there was a moment of profound silence as Laura and Michael absorbed everything they had heard. Then, without a word, they both rose and embraced their parents, a gesture that conveyed understanding, acceptance, and love more eloquently than any words could have done. That night, as Fiona and Lucas lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, a weight seemed to have lifted from them, both the weight of a secret long carried, now shared and transformed into another bond strengthening their family. They took it well, Lucas murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Fiona's back. Better than I expected, Fiona agreed. Though I think Michael may be looking at you with stars in his eyes for days to come. His father, the heroic cowboy. Lucas chuckled. I was just a man in love, doing what needed to be done. Fiona raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling like a curtain around them. You were my hero, she said softly. You still are. Lucas reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch as tender as it had been when they were young. And you, Fiona Wheeler, are still the bravest woman I've ever known. Riding up to a stranger's ranch, taking a chance on a lonely cowboy. Best risk I ever took, Fiona whispered, lowering her lips to his. As they embraced in the moonlight filtering through their window, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from terror to tranquility, from desperation to devotion. They had built something precious together, not just a ranch or a family, but a love that had withstood every test life had thrown at it. And if trouble ever came looking again, she knew without a doubt that Lucas would keep his promise, just as he had every day for the past 20 years. He would stand between her and harm, a shield made not of steel but of steadfast love and unwavering commitment. But trouble, it seemed, had finally tired of searching for them. In its place, they had found peace, purpose, and the profound joy that comes from loving and being loved completely, without reservation or condition. As she drifted towards sleep in Lucas's arms, Fiona's last conscious thought was one of gratitude for the twist of fate that had led her to his ranch on that desperate day long ago, and for the man who had looked at a frightened, fugitive widow and seen not a burden, but a woman worth standing up for. In the years that followed, the Wheeler family continued to thrive. Laura married the doctor's son and established a school for art on a corner of the ranch property, teaching local children and even a few adults who discovered a passion for painting later in life. Michael took increasingly greater responsibility for the ranch operations, introducing new breeding stock and innovative farming techniques that further enhanced their prosperity. Lucas and Fiona, now in their 60s but still vital and engaged with life, watched with pride as their legacy expanded to include grandchildren Laura's twins, Emily and James, named at Fiona's insistence, to reclaim a name that deserved better associations, and Michael's son, Lucas Jr., who inherited his grandfather's gray eyes and quiet strength. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered for a celebration on the ranch. Tables were set up beneath the oak trees, laden with food and decorated with flowers from Fiona's garden. Music played as couples danced on a wooden platform Michael had constructed for the occasion. As evening approached, Lucas led Fiona away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the creek, the same spot where they had stood 40 years earlier, and decided this would be the place they would build their home. "Happy anniversary, my love," Lucas said, presenting her with a small wooden box. Inside, Fiona found a gold locket not fancy or elaborate but beautifully crafted with a design of intertwined roses etched on its surface. "Open it," Lucas urged. Fiona did, and found inside a tiny pencil sketch she had made of Lucas during their first weeks in California, carefully preserved and fitted to the locket's dimensions. On the opposite side was a more recent sketch, one she had made of them together, sitting on their porch, his arm around her shoulders. "Lucas," she breathed, touched beyond words by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I had it made in San Francisco," he explained. "Thought you might like having a piece of our story close to your heart, though I know you carry it there already." Fiona looked up at the man who had been her protector, her partner, her lover, and her best friend for more than half her life. Age had silvered his hair and deepened the lines on his face, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had first looked at her with kindness when she most needed it, remained unchanged. "I love you," she said simply, for no other words seemed adequate to express the depth of her feeling. Lucas smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "And I love you, Fiona Wheeler, yesterday, today, and all the tomorrows we have left." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas and Fiona returned to their family hand in hand, two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, courage, and the abiding certainty that some bonds, once forged in fire, are unbreakable. Their story, which had begun with a desperate gunshot in a Wyoming night, had transformed into something neither could have imagined in those dark moments, a testament to the healing power of love, and the remarkable journey that can unfold when one person stands unwavering for another. And if anyone had asked Fiona if she regretted any part of that journey, the pain, the fear, the risk, her answer would have been immediate and absolute. Not a single moment. For every step, no matter how difficult, had led her here, to this life, to this man, to this love that had proven stronger than any force that had tried to stand against it. In the end, that was the true legacy of Lucas and Fiona Wheeler, not the prosperous ranch or even their beloved children and grandchildren, but the example they set of what could be built when two people faced life's challenges together, standing side by side, heart to heart, come what may. As twilight deepened into night and stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky above the celebration, Fiona leaned against Lucas's shoulder and whispered, "What if trouble comes looking for us again?" And Lucas, his arm tightening around her waist, responded with the same words he had spoken 4 decades earlier, words that had become not just a promise but the foundation of their life together. Then it will find me standing between you and it. Always.